madness. It is the shadow that stalks every step of Rand All-Four's journey. Long before the last battle, before armies clashed or the Dark One stirred in earnest, the Dragon Reborn fought an enemy far closer within his own mind. For in the Wheel of Time, saving the world is not only a matter of strength or prophecy, it is a matter of surviving yourself. The voice of Luz Therin. The first true sign comes as whispers, a flicker of words, a sudden echo in his thoughts. At first, Rand dismisses it. Stress, fatigue, the burden of command. But the whispers grow louder, sharper, until they form a voice. Luz Therin Telamon, the last dragon, the man who lived 3,000 years before, who fought and failed, who killed his own family before taking his life in despair. And now, that broken soul lives in Rand's head. At times, Luz Therin offers insight, knowledge of the power, memories of the Age of Legends. At times he rages, screams, and begs for death. His presence blurs the line between reincarnation and madness. Is Luz Therin truly alive within Rand? Or is this nothing more than the creeping rot of the taint? Robert Jordan leaves the question deliberately uncertain, forcing the reader to share Rand's terror. To believe you are the Dragon Reborn is already unbearable. To hear the voice of a dead man and not know if he is real is a torment few could endure. The taint's corruption. Of course, the source of this madness lies in seden itself. The male half of the One Power is tainted, a wound left by the Dark One's counterstroke against Luz Therin and his 100 companions. Every man who channels walks a doomed path. No matter how strong, no matter how noble, the corruption creeps in, twisting thought, corroding sanity, until nothing remains but destruction. Rand knows this. He has seen the fate of other men who channeled, raving, dangerous, consumed by chaos. Each time he seizes seden, he feels its oily corruption, the foulness of the shadow threading through him. It is not only a battle to control the power, it is a battle to control himself. Imagine holding a sword where every swing cuts not only your enemy, but also your own flesh. That is what seden is for Rand. A weapon and a curse, salvation and damnation bound together. The alienation of power, and the more powerful Rand becomes, the farther he drifts from humanity. His command of the power grows staggering, mountains move, cities tremble, armies scatter at his will. Yet each act widens the gulf between him and the people he seeks to protect. How can a shepherd from the two rivers remain the same when he wields the power of gods? How can he laugh with his friends when he sees their lives as fragile, fleeting, always one misstep away from annihilation? Rand begins to walk in two worlds at once, the world of men and the world of demigods, and in that space between, paranoia festers. He wonders constantly, do they fear me or love me? Am I still their friend or merely their weapon? Power isolates him, and isolation feeds the madness. Moments of fracture. There are scenes throughout the saga where Rand's internal fracture becomes undeniable. In Lord of Chaos, his capture by the Aes Sedai shatters him. Caged, beaten, humiliated, he hears Luz Therin screaming, urging him to slaughter them all. When he finally explodes at Dumai's wells, raining fire and destruction with the Asherman, it is not the triumph of a savior. It is the unleashing of a man on the brink, fueled by rage, despair, and voices that may not even be his own. In the gathering storm, the darkness within him deepens. He grows colder, harder, willing to use terror as a tool. There is a moment atop Dragonmount when he nearly chooses annihilation, nearly gives himself over to despair completely. The voice of Luz Therin no longer feels like a haunting. It feels like a merging, as though Rand himself is dissolving into the madness of his past life. And the most terrifying part, Rand knows it. He has moments of chilling clarity where he admits, I am losing my mind. To recognize your own descent, to stare into the abyss of madness and see yourself falling, is perhaps the cruelest awareness of all. The Symphony of Madness. The brilliance of Jordan's writing is that Luz Therin's voice never feels like a simple symptom. It feels like a symphony, one voice among many, layered with Rand's doubts, fears, and desperate hopes. At times, Luz Therin is enemy. At times, ally. At times, indistinguishable from Rand himself. This chorus of voices becomes the soundtrack of the Dragon Reborn's life. It isolates him from others, yes, but it also propels him toward his destiny. Without Luz Therin's presence, Rand might falter. Without the Taint's agony, he might cling too tightly to the boy he once was, never embracing the man he must become. Madness, in a twisted way, becomes part of his strength, the terror of self-awareness. Yet the tragedy remains. Rand is not ignorant of his condition. He knows the Taint is destroying him. He knows the voice in his head marks him as doomed. He knows his power isolates him beyond return. There is a moment in Winter's heart, just before the cleansing of saidin, where Rand reflects that he has been living on borrowed time. Every act of sanity has been a defiance of inevitability, and even after the Taint is purged, the scars of those years remain. The Dragon Reborn is not simply a savior. He is a man who walked willingly into madness, fully aware of what it meant, because the world had no other choice. Rand al'Thor's struggle is not merely against the Dark One. It is against the voices in his own skull, the corruption of the power itself, the isolation of strength, and the terror of losing himself. A symphony of voices is more than a metaphor. It is the reality of the dragon's life, a chorus of doubt, despair, rage, and fleeting hope, all screaming within one fragile human mind. And perhaps that is the greatest miracle of the wheel. That in the end, Rand endured not because he silenced the voices, but because he learned to live with them. Power. It is what every kingdom seeks, what every Aes Sedai covets, what every Forsaken weaponizes. But for Rand al'Thor, the Dragon Reborn, power is not a gift. It is a prison. The irony of Rand's story is that the stronger he becomes, the more alone he is. The boy from the Two Rivers, once surrounded by friends and laughter, finds himself walking a road no one else can follow. Because the burden of saving the world is not just about wielding the one power, it is about sacrificing everything human along the way. Power as a wall between loved ones. At first, Rand clings to those he loves. Egwene, Mat, Perrin, Nynaeve, they are anchors to a simpler life, proof that he is still just Rand al'Thor, Tam's son. But as his abilities grow, that connection frays. When he seizes saidin, when entire armies fall before him, how can his friends truly understand? How can he laugh with Mat about pranks in Emon's field when he carries memories of Luz Therin's Age of Legends? How can he share quiet moments with Egwene when she rises as Amelin's seat, an equal in power, but a rival in politics? Every step forward in strength pushes him one step further from the people who once defined him. Even his romances, with Elaine, Avienda, and Min, are poisoned by power. He loves them deeply, yet his presence endangers them constantly. They are targets because of him, pawns in the pattern's weave. Love becomes another battlefield, every embrace shadowed by fear. In this sense, Rand mirrors mythic heroes like Achilles or Gilgamesh, figures whose might is unparalleled, but whose very greatness isolates them from the mortals around them. The toll of sacrifice. But isolation is not his only burden. It is sacrifice, repeated, relentless, soul-crushing sacrifice. Rand sacrifices his innocence the moment he accepts that he is the Dragon Reborn. Gone is the shepherd's dream of a quiet life in the Two Rivers. In its place is a destiny soaked in blood. He sacrifices his freedom when nations demand his allegiance, when every word he speaks becomes a decree that could topple thrones. He becomes a ruler not by choice, but by necessity, forced into a political game he never wanted to play. He sacrifices his relationships, pushing away those who love him most, not because he doesn't care, but because he cares too much. If the shadow will strike at his heart, then he will guard that heart by hardening it into stone. And perhaps most painfully, he sacrifices his own humanity. To the world, he must be unbreakable, the Dragon Reborn, the world's only hope. But inside, he is fractured, tormented by the voice of Lu's Therin, haunted by the taint, teetering on the edge of madness. Yet he cannot show it. Vulnerability would erode confidence, and confidence is the only thing keeping armies marching behind him. In the gathering storm, we see this truth crystallize. Rand becomes the very embodiment of steel, cold and ruthless. He believes that mercy is weakness, that to save the world he must abandon everything that once made him human. It is only on Dragonmount, staring into the abyss of despair, that he realizes the terrible cost. He has nearly destroyed himself before ever reaching the last battle. The mask of strength. This need to appear strong is perhaps the cruelest irony of Rand's fate. The world looks at him and sees the dragon reborn, blazing with light, wielder of unimaginable power. They do not see the young man inside, trembling, desperate for a moment of rest. Every ruler expects him to be a general. Every Aes Sedai expects him to be a weapon. Every soldier expects him to be invincible. How can he ever admit weakness? How can he reveal doubt, fear, or grief when the eyes of nations are upon him? So Rand wears the mask. He becomes harder, more severe, hiding his vulnerability behind the facade of the dragon. The shepherd's smile fades. The laughter of Eamon's field dies. In its place is a man others fear to approach, a man who has buried his true self beneath layers of armor. But readers are allowed to glimpse behind the mask. We see the moments when he falters, when he nearly breaks. We see him standing alone, consumed by grief, after battles won at too great a cost. We see him clutching to fragments of Tam's wisdom, of Min's quiet comfort, of memories of the boy he once was. And in those moments, Rand becomes not just a hero, but a tragic figure. Because his greatest victory may not be defeating the Dark One. It may be enduring the crushing solitude of power without losing himself entirely. The tragic beauty of the Dragon Rand story reminds us of a universal truth. Power isolates. Whether in myth, history, or fantasy, those who bear the greatest burdens often stand alone. Kings, prophets, generals, their decisions shape nations, but they carry those decisions in solitude. Rand al'Thor is all of these at once, and more. He is savior, destroyer, ruler, and weapon. And though the pattern demands it, the toll is immense. The burden of power robs him of laughter, of intimacy, of the simple joys that once defined him. Yet it also forges him into something greater. A man who understands, perhaps better than anyone, the price of sacrifice. So when we think of Rand, let us not only remember the blazing moments of glory, the cleansing of Saidin, the uniting of nations, the final confrontation with the Dark One. Let us also remember the loneliness in his eyes, the sacrifices no one saw, the mask of strength he wore for a world too desperate to allow him to be weak. Because the wheel of time does not give us a perfect hero. It gives us a man, burdened, isolated, and scarred, who carries the weight of power even when it threatens to break him. And in that burden lies his true greatness. When we speak of Rand al'Thor's journey, it is tempting to imagine it only in terms of conquest and struggle, the dragon reborn who battled forsaken united nations and faced the Dark One at Sheol Ghul. Yet the true heart of Rand's story is not found in the clash of armies or the blazing fire of the one power. It lies in something quieter, something more human, the transformation of a young man crushed by burden into someone who could finally find meaning, even solace, in the very destiny that once threatened to destroy him. The breaking point. Before we can speak of healing, we must recall the breaking. Rand's descent into cold ruthlessness in the gathering storm represents one of the most harrowing arcs in modern fantasy. He becomes a figure who believes that mercy is weakness, that compassion is an indulgence he can no longer afford. He distances himself from everyone, even those who love him most. On Dragonmount, Rand nearly surrenders to despair. Staring into the abyss, he considers ending his own life, convinced that his existence only spreads pain and destruction. It is in that moment, however, that a revelation strikes. If he must die, let it be not in despair, but in defiance. Not as a prisoner of destiny, but as someone who chooses to embrace it. This moment mirrors countless archetypal stories. Christ in Gethsemane, who prays for the cup of suffering to pass from him, yet accepts it for the sake of humanity. Siddhartha Gautama beneath the Bodhi tree, confronting Mara's temptations before awakening to enlightenment. In literature, we find echoes of Frodo Baggins at Mount Doom, realizing the ring's corruption cannot be borne forever, yet pressing forward until salvation comes from another's hand. Rand joins this lineage of figures who are transformed not by triumph alone, but by a redefinition of what triumph means. From burden to purpose. What changes after Dragonmount is not the scale of Rand's power. He remains the mightiest channeler of the age, but the way he understands that power. Previously, saidin felt like a chain around his neck, a poisoned gift that threatened his sanity and endangered everyone near him. After his epiphany, the same power becomes something different, not a curse, but a tool to serve the pattern. This philosophical shift cannot be overstated. Where once he believed himself doomed to madness and destruction, he begins to see himself as a necessary instrument, a thread deliberately woven by the wheel. In Towers of Midnight and A Memory of Light, this acceptance radiates through his actions. He no longer fights against his fate, but with it, leaning into the inevitability of the last battle, not as a victim, but as a willing participant. And here we see a profound psychological truth. Suffering is amplified by resistance. To feel trapped is to double the pain. But to see hardship as meaningful, even sacred, is to endure with dignity. As Viktor Frankl wrote in Man's Search for Meaning, in some ways suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds a meaning, such as the meaning of a sacrifice. Rand embodies this principle. His torment, once meaningless, becomes purposeful, the philosophy of renewal. Another element of Rand's recovery lies in his renewed relationship with the world itself. After Dragonmount, he begins to smile again. He notices the warmth of the sun, the simple beauty of clouds, the quiet resilience of life continuing despite shadow. This is more than sentimentality. It is a reawakening to what he is fighting for. For a long time, Rand fought to fulfill prophecy, to defeat the Dark One, to bear the title of Dragon Reborn. But after his breaking, he fights for life itself, for laughter, for green fields, for the possibility of joy. This echoes the philosophy of Albert Camus, who spoke of finding meaning in an absurd universe not by escaping it, but by embracing it. Camus writes of Sisyphus, condemned to push his boulder eternally, the struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. In a similar way, Rand's happiness does not come from escaping his duty, but from redefining it as a labor worth bearing. The legacy of healing, yet we must not mistake Rand's shift for a magical erasure of trauma. To endure what he endured, the voices of Luz Therin, the weight of madness, the isolation of command, leave scars that cannot fully vanish. What the narrative gives us is not perfect healing, but the possibility of recovery. After Sheol Ghul, Rand lives on in a new body, free of the one power, free of the taint, free of the unbearable spotlight. For the first time since leaving Eamon's Field, he has a chance to be simply human again, to wander the world, to touch the soil without armies behind him, to rediscover the self that was buried beneath the mantle of Dragon Reborn. This raises a crucial question: what does long-term recovery look like for someone like Rand? History gives us few analogues, but we might consider the aftermath of great wars. Soldiers who survive do not simply return to who they were. They carry invisible wounds, but many also develop resilience, perspective, even gratitude for life. Rand's journey suggests something similar, not a return to innocence, but an integration of suffering into a deeper wisdom. And perhaps this is the most radical thing the Wheel of Time offers, that even the savior of the world deserves rest, deserves peace, deserves a future beyond sacrifice. Conclusion: the solace of acceptance. Randall Thor's story is not only the story of a hero who wins a cosmic battle. It is the story of a human being who learns to carry unimaginable weight without being crushed by it. His breaking on Dragonmount, his rebirth into acceptance, and his quiet departure after Sheol Ghul all testify to a universal truth that meaning, not power, is what sustains us. In this sense, Rand's arc transcends fantasy and becomes a parable. It tells us that even in our darkest struggles, when despair whispers that surrender is the only escape, there remains the possibility of renewal. That suffering, when given purpose, can transform from a burden into a calling, that even those who carried the heaviest fates may yet find moments of joy, of laughter, of simple human connection. When the wheel turns and stories fade into legend, the dragon reborn will be remembered for his battles. But perhaps what we should remember most is not the fire he wielded, nor the nations he commanded, but the lesson he lived, that even at the edge of breaking, one can find solace, not by escaping destiny, but by embracing it with open hands. And in that embrace, Randor Thor became not only the savior of his age, but a symbol of what it means to be human in the face of impossible weight.